Hi, I'm Todd Jones, host of the podcast Press Box Access. Here's a clip from my conversation with Wendell Barnhouse. Wendell was there for an NCAA regional final when Bob Knight had a unique encounter with a courtside telephone.
You were there in 1987 when Keith Smart hits his final shot to win the national title for Indiana. And this is only a couple years into your tenure as a national college writer.
Yep.
What was it like on a Monday night at the end of a championship game trying to write that story?
Again, and I did have a good view of that. It was down at my end of the floor. I was like in the second row of press row, so I was kind of elevated. And the interesting thing, the very first Final Four I ever went to when I was working in Dallas, the new Final Four in '82 was in New Orleans. And I asked golf for the weekend. I had a friend in New Orleans. I got tickets. That was Michael Jordan against Georgetown.
So you saw that?
I saw that game.
Yeah, but you didn't have to write that one. This time you got to write.
No, I got, yeah. It's like, hey, I'm just a fan. But, Jordan's shot was about 10 feet away from Smart's. And obviously it was Knight's. Turned out to be his last national championship. Maybe I'll set you up for some Knight questions. But I remember going to that Final Four and knowing Knight's reputation with writers. And in the group press conferences, where we're all sitting there in the audience and raising our hand to ask a question, I made damn sure that my questions for Bob Knight were practically written down, because I was not going to have him chop me into little pieces about what a stupid question that was.
Right.
And it was, I felt like I was at a professor's class for that. But yeah, that was, again, it was one of those things where, it's like, oh, okay, championship game, final shot. Hoosiers had come out.
Right. It was all there. The whole story was fabulous, right?
Yeah, and so, there were plenty of, as a writer, you want as many options to go with, and that game provided quite a few, and I don't remember if my story was worth a damn, but it made deadline.
So you wrote down this question for Knight, and you rehearsed it, and you asked it. What kind of response did you get?
It was actually pretty good. I want to say that I remember him at least saying, "Oh, that's a good question," or whatever. But I was prepared. And as you well know, and I know this is kind of your motto, it's like failing to prepare is preparing to fail.
John
Wooden, and I didn't pick that up early in my career, but I picked it up as I went along and saying, you know what? You need to be ready for anything. And
plus, the week before, you were in Cincinnati for the regional.
Yeah, that's
when Indiana was playing LSU, and Bob Knight and Dale Brown, LSU coach, were big enemies. And there was a moment there where you're sitting press row, and what did you see? I
saw Knight after a call slam the phone. They had a phone at press row, believe it or not, an actual phone like this phone. I guess for the officials to call wherever or whatever. It was a red phone. I don't know. Maybe it had something to do with the president. But anyway, the Knight was upset with a call, and he was sitting. It was right in front of the the members of the basketball committee get to sit at the official scores table, and I think the phone was right in front of one of those members of the committee. And Knight picked the handset of the phone up and slammed it down on the receiver, and the phone jumped up off the table, and he didn't get a technical. And, LSU, which was a very underseeded, underrated team, and Indiana was one of the teams that I think they were probably a 1 seed, but they were favored to probably win the national championship. They barely beat LSU. And, at that time, Dale Brown had the reputation. The previous year, he'd gone to the Final Four, I think, with an 11 seed.
Right.
And so, he had this reputation of messing teams up that were better than his team. And he was a very adamant enemy of Knight as far as his bullying techniques.
Yeah, he used to just call Knight a bully, which was unheard of for another coach to say that type of thing.
And in all honesty, as it's turned out over the years, Dale Brown was right about that, I think. But so that that had kind of set the tone for the Final Four of Knight previously had thrown the chair across the floor and had, he had a number of either on-court or off-court temper tantrums where he had become, terrible Bobby Knight. So, that incident at the regional final was a good precursor to that Final Four in New Orleans.
Well, 87 was kind of the height of his power I mean,
Exactly.
he won. That was his third national championship.
Yep.
He won. He took the U.S. to the gold medal in '84.
Yep.
He was the guy. This is only a couple years into the three-point shot, which he never really adapted to. So he was rolling the game at that time. And so he was just always in the news and always copied for writers.
Yep. And, his last Final Four was in 92.
Yep, I was there.
When Duke repeated. Duke beats Indiana in the semifinals. Close game. And, it was famous for after that game. I mean, here's Krzyzewski. He's already won a national championship, former Knight assistant.
Played for Knight at Army.
He was a Coach Knight guy. And in the handshake line, Knight gave him the drive-by. The handshake, it wasn't like stop and put your hand on the guy's shoulder saying, nice job, good luck in the championship game. It was just like handshake, keep going. He goes down to the end of the bench, and he wasn't an assistant coach, but Knight knew him, and he spent more time chatting with that guy at the end of the bench than he had with Krzyzewski's former assistant.
Right.
And it was just a virtual slap in the face to Krzyzewski. To me, it was like, my pupil is now the teacher, and I don't like it. Grudge was one of the things Knight did more than a lot of people. He did some nice things for some people, but he had a long list of grudges, and you just happened to end up on the list.
Wendell, how did you take a guy like Knight when you were writing about college basketball and not let personal feelings impact what you were writing? What was the challenge of that?
As it went on, I mean, in 87, not so much in 92. I mean, I didn't, if I'd have had an opportunity to write a column after the Duke-Indiana game in 92, I would have probably, torched him. I remember when he got fired, I wrote a column for the paper, and, by that time I had gotten to the point of realizing that this is a guy he was basically a hypocrite, because what he demanded of his players, he couldn't do himself, which was control his temper. He wanted his players to play a perfect game, and he got on them. He was even angry at his son when he played for him if he made a mistake. I mean, he was a guy that, instead of being able to control his emotions like he expected his players to, he couldn't do it. And to me, that was the reason why. And I wrote that. I said, here's the irony of Bob Knight, who at the, one of the greatest coaches ever, was that he didn't practice what he preached.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that was personal, but that at the time was like, I guess maybe I had more of an epiphany, thinking, okay, this is what this guy is, and you have to understand it, and this is why he doesn't coach at Indiana.
I always thought Knight was just kind of representative of a certain era of a coaching style.
Exactly.
He played basketball at Ohio State in the early 60s when Woody Hayes was the football coach. Bob was from Ohio. He understood the whole Woody Hayes thing. And I just think in those days, coaches could get away with that type of thing. Not to excuse it. No. It was just different.
Yep.
And it was just fascinating to see how that type of coach, not just Knight, but other guys of that ilk, could behave and be excused. And that's looking back in a perspective now, years later, when things have changed. But it never ceased to be a fascinating topic for writers when they were there in the moment.
Yeah, and, the thing is that, I mean, the world we live in now with Twitter and social media and whether or not it's a viral video or not. I mean, Woody Hayes punching the Clemson player went viral, but it was only on TV.
Right.
Now, you can imagine the commotion it would have created in this modern day if it had been all over Twitter. I mean, he did lose his job over that.
Right.
And again, the video doesn't lie. I mean, Knight choking Neil Reed in practice was, again, one of the nails in the coffin for him that showed his Woody Hayes type behavior toward one of his players, not to an opposing player, but one of his players. In the time when he looked like he kicked his son on the bench, those kind of things. And, then he would make fun of it by bringing a whip to the regional final or the Final Four.
There's such a long list of things that, that counterbalanced the 900 wins and national championships and everything else. And again, Knight wasn't alone. There was a lot of coaches like that.